opens the center immediately, creating pawn tension and freeing the queen and bishop for rapid development. Pawn on e6 opens a diagonal for the queen and prepares development, a solid, flexible foundation for black's ensuing struggle. Developing the knight to its most natural square, preparing castling and controlling key central squares. Developing a knight so early signals a commitment to classical central play, preparing to challenge white's early pawn advance. Securing central space, white prepares to contest the d5 square and build a flexible pawn structure. Challenging white's central grip, this pawn thrust ignites immediate positional tension and aims for active piece play. Solidifying the center's pawn structure, white signals intent to contest the queen's gambit, declines key squares, and prepare for queenside expansion. Developing the bishop to a solid defensive square, it prepares for castling and contributes to central pawn support, a sensible piece placement. Pinning the knight disrupts black's development, indirectly eyeing the d-pawn and creating attacking possibilities. Challenging the pinned bishop immediately creates complex pawn structures and potential tactical skirmishes for central control. Sacrificing the bishop offers white a clear structural advantage in the pawn formation, but be mindful of the doubled f-pawns black now possesses. They could become a weakness or a pawn roller depending on how the game unfolds. Reclaiming the bishop with this recapture establishes a symmetrical pawn structure, potentially leading to a more positional game where piece activity and central control will become paramount. Solidifying the center and preparing to develop the queen's bishop offers white a tranquil yet robust pawn structure, gradually constricting black's development. Safeguarding the monarch by tucking him away behind a pawn shield is a natural instinct after white's bishop exchange. This solidifies black's kingside structure and prepares for potential central pawn pushes or piece maneuvering in the upcoming middle game. Bringing the rook to the open c-file establishes immediate pressure on black's queenside, preparing for potential pawn advances or a future exchange to exploit the open file, while also reinforcing the central structure and keeping options open for kingside defense. Solidifying the pawn structure, this move prepares to potentially challenge white's central control and create a more robust defensive setup. It's a quiet yet purposeful maneuver that hints at a patient approach, aiming to build a solid foundation before any significant action unfolds. Black sacrifices immediate central pawn dynamism for long-term structural integrity. Developing the bishop to its most active diagonal, this piece now eyes the kingside and prepares to support central pawns, aiming for a harmonious integration of forces. Developing the knight to its optimal square, this maneuver sets the stage for kingside counterplay and prepares to contest the central d-file. Castling now secures the king and prepares to bring the rook into play, potentially targeting the c-file. Accepting the pawn opens lines and aims to equalize material, but be mindful of the bishop pair you've surrendered for white's solid pawn structure. Recapturing the pawn on c4 solidifies white's central pawn structure and repositions the bishop to a more active diagonal, eyeing black's kingside and the d5 square. This piece placement offers better scope for the bishop than its previous position on d3 and begins to contest the d-file. It's a logical recapture, aiming for rapid development and a slightly more harmonious piece arrangement before black can fully consolidate their position. Unleashing a central pawn thrust like that often aims to shatter the opponent's pawn structure, potentially opening lines towards the king or creating dynamic imbalances. It's a bold attempt to wrest the initiative by challenging white's central control and forcing a decision on the pawn complex, but be acutely aware of the structural repercussions it might leave behind. Securing the bishop's diagonal while subtly preventing a knight's jump into g4 offers a stable pawn structure, though it does concede a slight spatial advantage to black's advanced central pawns. Liberating the e-pawn opens avenues for development and pressure on the center, though it also creates a slightly less solid pawn structure for black in the long run. Liberating the d4 pawn now establishes a central pawn duo, aiming to seize control of the core of the board and potentially restrict black's piece mobility. Unleashing the knight towards the queenside opens up intriguing possibilities for piece activity, aiming to disrupt white's central pawn structure and potentially exploit the now exposed d4 pawn. Repositioning the bishop to the safer square clears the d-file for the rook and prepares for future queenside pressure, potentially targeting black's slightly exposed monarch. bf5 liberates the bishop from its pawn chain, offering increased activity and potential for a queenside initiative. Repositioning the rook to the central file aims to challenge black's passive pawn structure and prepare for a potential queenside advance with the b-pawn, creating more dynamic play. Initiating the repositioning of the bishop to a more active diagonal offers black excellent attacking prospects on the kingside, challenging white's central influence and preparing for a potential pawn storm. Relocating the rook to the file aims to enhance its influence on open files, potentially supporting a future advance or bolstering defense on the queenside, subtly preparing for an endgame scenario where rook activity becomes paramount. Reclaiming the knight's central influence is the immediate objective as the steed repositions itself for a more active role, potentially eyeing squares like c5 or b6 again after the minor skirmish on the queenside. Opening the d-file creates immediate pressure, forcing black to confront the advancing pawn and potentially compromise their pawn structure or piece placement. A daring sidestep in the face of central pressure, 17. RC8 skillfully redirects the rook to a more active square, hinting at future skirmishes along the c-file and potentially challenging white's piece coordination. A bold maneuver, nd4** sacrifices a pawn for significant central influence and opens up diagonals for the remaining pieces, aiming to disrupt black's pawn structure and potentially create attacking chances against the kingside. Suddenly, the bishop relocates to a square offering immense influence over the queenside diagonal, eyeing potential targets and creating a hidden battery with the rook. White initiates a bold pawn sacrifice, aiming to disrupt black's pawn structure and create attacking opportunities, forcing a recalculation of black's defensive setup. Opening the f-file offers a precarious glimmer of counterplay against white's centralized king, but at the significant cost of surrendering pawn structure integrity and allowing white's pieces a clear path to penetrate the now weakened kingside. Unleashing the dual attack on both the queen and rook, this pawn thrust seizes the initiative by disrupting black's harmony and creating immediate threats that demand precise responses, all while white subtly improves their piece placement. Relocating the monarch to safety is paramount after the violent pawn exchange and the disruption of the pawn chain. h7 provides a breathing space, evading the immediate pressure on the g-file and preparing to potentially redeploy the rook to a more active square. Unleashing the queen here is a bold assertion, instantly challenging black's kingside defenses and creating immediate pressure on the d7 pawn. This move fundamentally alters the tactical landscape, forcing black to address the queen's central presence and its potential to infiltrate weak points. The immediate threat of queenside domination is palpable, as the white queen eyes further penetration and black's defensive structure faces significant strain. The centralization of the queen, while aggressive, also exposes it to potential counterplay if black can orchestrate a swift and accurate response. Consider the repercussions on black's development. This queen maneuver could disrupt their ability to consolidate their pieces effectively. A bold repositioning, the queen leaps into the fray, targeting the now exposed c3 knight and the pawn chain, aiming to disrupt white's coordinated pieces and create immediate counterplay on the queenside. Unleashing a pawn storm towards the enemy king, white prioritizes immediate king safety and potential pawn promotion, creating a significant threat that black must address directly, thus diverting resources from other critical areas of the board and opening up avenues for further offensive action. Black's rook now anchors itself to the e8 square, a crucial defensive post preventing the white queen from making further inroads and preparing to contest the vital e-file. A daring queen sacrifice initiated, aiming to shatter black's defensive structure and exploit the exposed king. A desperate attempt to regain some queenside activity by the black queen, yet it lands squarely in a perilous position, offering a clear target for white's attacking pieces and leaving the black king exposed to potential tactical shots down the newly opened central files. Gaining space on the king side opens up attacking avenues against the black king, which suddenly finds itself exposed after the pawn exchange on the queen side. Capturing the advanced pawn on e7 now opens up a whole new dimension of tactical possibilities, as the white queen now sits precariously on the 7th rank, directly threatening your king's safety while also creating potential forks and discoveries for your pieces. A crucial regrouping maneuver, the bishop retreats to a more secure square, anticipating potential threats and preparing for future pawn advances, while simultaneously maintaining influence over key central diagonals. Unlocking the potential of the c-file with the rook, aiming to disrupt white's central control and potentially target the vulnerable d5 pawn. Solidifying the pawn chain and preparing for a potential kingside pawn storm, this move establishes a stronger defensive posture. The queen's repositioning to d8 aims to bolster the kingside defense, anticipating potential threats along the d-file and offering a conduit for the rook should the central files open further. Reclaiming the open d-file after black's seemingly passive recapture, this repositioning of the rook aims to exert immediate pressure, potentially supporting a future advance or preparing to double rooks, while simultaneously defending the d5 pawn and looking to exploit any weaknesses in black's pawn structure that might arise from their recent queen sacrifice. Black's queen, now actively eyeing the queen side and potentially the weakened king side after the doubled pawns on the e-file, seeks a more central influence, preparing to contest the weakened light squares and probe for weaknesses. Unleashing the pawn storm on the king side, this initiative aims to pry open the black king's defenses before any major piece can effectively intervene. Recognizing the looming danger on the king side, black aims to solidify the defensive structure and create a temporary sanctuary for the monarch, anticipating further incursions. Reasserting control of the c-file with knight mobility opens avenues for rook infiltration and potential pressure on the queen side. Sacrificing the bishop on c2 opens up the critical diagonal for the queen and aims to exploit the weakened kingside by creating immediate threats against the white monarch. Unleashing a decisive discovered attack, the rook's repositioning on e7 rips open black's defenses by simultaneously threatening the queen and creating a dangerous discovered check if the rook were to move again. This audacious placement not only seizes immediate initiative, but also forces black into a difficult defensive sequence, as their king's safety is now critically compromised. White's initiative escalates rapidly. The rook on g8 enters a potential tactical melee, aiming to liberate the besieged king and create counterplay against white's potentially exposed pieces on the king side. Unleashing a potent pin, the rook now anchors itself on the 7th rank, creating a suffocating bind around black's queen and forcing a defensive concession that disrupts any hope of counterplay. A bold attempt to disrupt white's initiative by placing the bishop on a diagonal that eyes the enemy monarch. Unleashing a decisive rook sacrifice, white opens a terrifying diagonal towards black's exposed monarch. Securing the monarch amidst this chaotic tactical skirmish appears paramount. The king's escape route is now being meticulously constructed. Unleashing a sudden diagonal threat, this audacious queen sacrifice aims to pry open the black king's defenses, capitalizing on the exposed pawn structure and the pinned knight.